Hi, welcome back, everyone. Here's the next installment of my mini lecture series. Um, in my previous lecture on what philosophy is and what critical thinking is, I talked a bit about Socrates, and we talked about the origins of philosophy. And I mentioned that Socrates taught Plato, and that Plato wrote down most of everything that we know about Socrates. Xenophon wrote quite a bit about Socrates as well, as did Aristophanes. But Plato was really the one we're mainly indebted to know about what Socrates did. And in fact, scholars have a difficult time separating Socrates from Plato. They don't know how much of Plato's written philosophy is Socrates and how much of it is Plato's own. But Plato makes a significant contribution to what I think is an important way to understand critical thinking in this little allegory in Book 7 of The Republic. The Republic is Plato's longest dialogue. Might be longer than the Laws, or the Laws might be longer. In any case, it's one of his longest dialogues, and it's probably his most famous dialogue. He only wrote dialogues. He had characters who were having a fictitious conversation. The Republic is a very long fictitious conversation, and in Book 7, we don't use chapters, we use books in philosophy. So we wouldn't call it Chapter 7, we call it Book 7, just past the middle of the Republic. Plato tells this story. It's this allegory. He has one of his characters, his best known character perhaps, is Socrates, and Socrates in the Republic tells the story about prisoners in a cave. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about that story, and also suggest that you all read it, so that we can arrive at a better understanding of cognitive errors or biases or fallacies. We're going to learn about all these different types of mistakes that we can make in our critical thinking, and we've started to touch on what these mistakes are and what they mean and how to avoid them. But I think talking about this allegory, talking about this story, can really help us to have a better philosophical grasp of what these errors or fallacies really are, and how we can overcome them, and what we can turn into if we overcome them. So these prisoners described in the story, it's a fictitious story, are in this cave. It's a long, dark cave, well underground, and the prisoners are all the way in the back of the cave where it's pitch black. And they are chained. Their necks are chained, their hands and feet are chained, and all they can see in front of them for their entire lives is the back wall of the cave. And they can't turn their heads, they can't turn around at all, they can't move their hands or their feet. All they do for their entire lives is look at the back wall of the cave. And behind these prisoners, there's a fire. And their light projected by the fire goes past some sort of stone wall or partition where these people inside the cave pose objects and move objects around and make up sounds to go along with them to project on the wall of the cave in front of the prisoners. So it's almost like these prisoners are sitting there in the pitch black seeing this puppet show for their entire lives. And Socrates says in Plato's story, that's what these prisoners think is real. That's reality to them. It's this puppet show on the back wall of the cave created by these objects and these figures and the light projected by the fire. And the story progresses. And by the way, Socrates says, these prisoners are all of us. He mentions that in the course of the story, which I think is a really important detail. And the story progresses when one of them somehow breaks free. One of them somehow breaks free of those chains and turns around and sees the firelight. And the way Socrates describes it is sort of funny. I mean, the person sees the firelight and immediately wants to turn back around and go back to the way they were before. They don't want to progress in the way they see things. They don't want to progress in their understanding of reality. They don't want to see more than they've already seen. They want to go back to seeing those images, to seeing the simple puppet show on the back wall of the cave. But someone comes along, some wise teacher, someone to help them, perhaps a philosopher, perhaps someone like Socrates or someone like Plato, perhaps someone else who they have in mind. And this person, this guide, helps that freed prisoner to keep progressing, to turn back around, to adjust his or her eyes to that firelight, and to move up out of the cave. And eventually, this prisoner progresses out of the cave and into the real light, the sunlight. And this, I think, this represents a different state of being, a different state of understanding. The story is using light as a metaphor for our understanding, our ability to conceive of the truth. And so this prisoner has progressed past the world of the firelight, the realm of the firelight, and now into the realm of sunlight. And eventually, the person is able to look at the sun itself. The person progresses that far, but it's difficult. The guide almost has to force them at certain parts. The person initially wants to turn back. It's a steep ascent. There's a struggle involved. So the cave is not only long and dark, but it's rugged. It's winding. It's steep. The person has to climb up in order to get out into that world of the sunlight. And here, I think Plato is telling us about ourselves and about our fight to see the truth and to really be critical thinkers. We want to resist. Ignorance is bliss. In many ways, it's easier to be ignorant. It's easier not to challenge ourselves and not to be challenged by others. It's easier just to sit there and watch the puppet show. It's more difficult to turn around, to climb out. But the rewards of making that journey are indeed great, as the story tells us, and I think as we've begun to learn. And so, I'm not going to tell you everything about the story. I've already spoiled quite a bit of it. I really do encourage you to read that on your own. It's at the very beginning of Book 7. It's just a few pages long. It's a very interesting read, and it should really help us to think about what critical thinking really is and the difficulties involved in being a critical thinker. And just when you think you've got it, just when you think you've actually become a critical thinker, well, maybe there's another phase. Maybe there's another step on the journey, and we should keep that in mind as we proceed. Okay.